What if the quiet single father restocking shelves at an upscale boutique wasn't just a stockroom clerk? What if the tech billionaire who challenged him to face her twin bodyguards in a friendly demonstration had no idea she was about to witness something that would change her life forever? Not through violence, but through something far more profound. This is not a story about fighting. It's a story about hidden strength, second chances, and the moment when pride meets grace. What happens when the most powerful person in the room realizes the strongest one has been there all along, choosing silence over spectacle? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 9:15 a.m. The atrium of Apex Meridian Tower hummed with the kind of energy that only money and ambition could generate. The building itself was a monument to modern excess. 73 floors of steel and reflective glass that pierced the skyline of Clearwater Heights like a silver needle. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral of polished granite and ambient lighting, where every footstep echoed with purpose and every conversation was a negotiation. On the mezzanine level, a crowd had gathered. Not the usual cluster of suited executives clutching their tablets and protein shakes, but something different. A demonstration. Employees lined the railings, phones out, whispering excitedly. Security personnel stood at attention near the elevators, and in the center of it all, beneath a skylight that poured morning sun across the marble like liquid gold, stood Kellis Norwick. She was impossible to miss. Not just because of her height, though at 5'10" she commanded space effortlessly, but because of the aura she carried. Kellis was the founder and CEO of Norwick Digital Systems, a tech empire built on cloud infrastructure and artificial intelligence. At 32, she had already graced the covers of 3 major business magazines, been keynote speaker at 4 international summits, and accumulated a fortune that most people couldn't comprehend. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek bun. Her tailored charcoal suit fitted perfectly, and her expression was one of calm, measured control. But today, she wasn't here to talk quarterly earnings or unveil a new product. Today was about something else entirely. Flanking her on either side were 2 identical figures, mirror images of discipline and intimidation. The Volkov twins, Dmitry and Alexei, her personal bodyguards. Both stood at 6'4", broad-shouldered and stone-faced, their black tactical suits making them look like something out of a high-budget action film. They had been with Kellis for 3 years, hired after a stalking incident that had rattled even her unshakable composure. They were former competitive fighters, trained in Krav Maga, boxing, and various grappling arts. They didn't just protect her. They projected her power. Kellis stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd with practiced ease. Before we dive into the quarterly innovation briefing, she began, her tone smooth but commanding, I want to talk about something we don't discuss enough in corporate. Environments, resilience, adaptability, the ability to face pressure and respond with precision. She gestured to the twins beside her. Dmitry and Alexei have been training with me for months now in practical self-defense techniques. It's not about aggression. It's about awareness, confidence, and knowing you can handle yourself when things don't go according to plan. A few people nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. Kellis had a reputation for being unconventional, for pushing boundaries in ways that made HR nervous, but kept the company culture buzzing. She turned slightly, scanning the room, and then her gaze landed on a figure near the back. A man in his late 30s, wearing a plain navy polo shirt with the Apex Meridian retail logo stitched on the pocket. He was stacking inventory boxes near the entrance to the boutique shop on the ground floor, moving with quiet efficiency, head down, shoulders relaxed. Kellis tilted her head, something flickering in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or amusement. You, she called out, pointing directly at him. Yes, you. The stockroom associate. The room fell into a strange suspended silence. The man stopped mid-motion, a box of luxury candles balanced in his arms. He looked up, his expression neutral, and then glanced around as if to confirm she was actually talking to him. Me? He asked, his voice steady but quiet. Yes, you, Kellis said, stepping forward with a slight smile. What's your name? He set the box down carefully, straightened, and wiped his hands on his jeans. William, he said. William Brown. William, she repeated, as if testing the name. How long have you worked here? About 8 months. And you've been doing inventory and stocking this whole time? He nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Kellis smiled wider now, the kind of smile that wasn't unkind but held a challenge. How about a demonstration? She said lightly. Nothing serious. Just a little sparring drill with Dmitri and Alexei here. Show the team that anyone, regardless of background, can learn to handle themselves under pressure. The crowd stirred. A few nervous laughs. Someone whispered, "Is she serious?" William didn't laugh. He didn't look nervous either. He just stood there, hands at his sides, his expression unreadable. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," he said quietly. "Why not?" Kellis asked, her tone playful but firm. "It's just for fun. A friendly demonstration. No one's going to get hurt." William looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the twins who stood like statues, arms crossed, faces blank. Something passed through his eyes. Not fear, not anger. Just a kind of tired recognition, like someone who had seen this script before and knew how it ended. "All right," he said finally. "If you insist." The room erupted into murmurs. People pulled out their phones. The twins exchanged a glance, the faintest hint of amusement passing between them. Kellis gestured toward the open space near the center of the atrium. "Excellent," she said. "Let's clear some room." William stepped forward slowly, setting down the clipboard he'd been holding. He walked across the polished floor in his worn sneakers, his movements deliberate, unhurried. There was no bravado, no theatrics. Just a man walking toward something inevitable. The twins moved into position, flanking him on either side. They didn't touch him yet, just circled, assessing. The crowd pressed closer, phones raised, recording every second. Kellis stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching with the focused intensity of someone who thrived on control and order. She had orchestrated this moment perfectly. A little spectacle, a little inspiration, and a reminder to her employees that confidence came from preparation. But as William turned to face the twins, something shifted in the air. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but those who were paying close attention felt it. The way he planted his feet. The way his shoulders dropped just slightly, centering his weight. The way his hands hung loose at his sides, not clenched, not raised, just ready. Dmitri moved first. A quick step forward, not aggressive, just testing. A light grab toward William's shoulder. And then it happened. William moved, not fast. Not flashy. Just efficient. His hand redirected Dmitri's wrist with a subtle rotation, his body shifting just enough to slip outside the line of force. Dmitri stumbled forward half a step, caught off balance, and before he could reset, William had already turned toward Alexei, who was coming in from the other side. Alexei reached for a collar tie, a standard grappling entry. William's forearm intercepted it, redirected it downward, and in the same motion, he pivoted his hips, using Alexei's own momentum to guide him past. Alexei took 2 steps forward before he realized he'd been moved entirely out of position. The crowd was silent now. No laughter. No whispers. Just stunned, breathless attention. The twins reset, circling again, this time with less amusement and more focus. They came in together this time, coordinated, professional. And William met them with the same calm precision. Every movement minimal. Every step deliberate. He wasn't fighting them. He was guiding them like water around stones. Within 30 seconds, both twins were breathing harder. Within a minute, they had stepped back, exchanging a look that said everything. William stood in the center, hands still at his sides, breathing easy. Callus stared, her arms slowly uncrossing. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Someone in the crowd finally broke the silence. Who is this guy? And in that moment, everything Callus thought she knew about control, about power, about the people who existed quietly in her world, shattered like glass beneath a spotlight. Callus Norwick didn't build her empire by accident. She built it with sleepless nights, ruthless negotiations, and a refusal to accept anything less than perfection. The daughter of two immigrants who had worked double shifts to send her to a decent school, Callus had learned early that the world didn't hand you anything. You took it, or you disappeared. By age 16, she was coding apps in her bedroom. By 22, she had her first startup acquisition. By 28, Norwick Digital Systems was valued at over $2 billion. She had been featured in Forbes, interviewed by Bloomberg, and invited to speak at the Global Economic Forum in Zurich. Her face was on billboards in 3 countries, her name synonymous with innovation and relentless ambition. But what the headlines didn't capture was the cost. Callus had no close friends. She had business associates, investors, board members, employees who admired her from a distance, but no one who really knew her. No one who asked how she was doing without wanting something in return. Her romantic relationships had been brief, transactional, and ultimately unsatisfying. The last man she dated had called her emotionally unavailable before walking out of her penthouse for the last time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She hadn't cried. She had opened her laptop and worked until dawn. Control was her lifeline. She controlled her schedule, her image, her company, her environment. She controlled her body too, rising at 5 a.m. every day for a 2-hour training session with the Volkov twins. Kickboxing, functional strength training, sparring drills. It wasn't vanity. It was discipline. It was proof that she could master anything if she committed to it, and she was good. Better than most amateurs, perhaps even better than some professionals. The twins pushed her hard, but she always pushed back harder. She didn't like to lose. Not at business. Not at fitness. Not at anything. That's why the moment in the atrium had rattled her so deeply. She had challenged William Brown as a spontaneous gesture, a way to demonstrate leadership and inspire her employees. She had assumed it would be harmless, maybe even amusing. A stockroom worker fumbling through a few basic moves while the twins gently corrected him. A teaching moment. A morale boost. But that's not what happened. What happened was that William had made her bodyguards, 2 of the most intimidating and capable men she had ever met, look hesitant. Not defeated, but uncertain. And that uncertainty had spread through the room like smoke, curling into every corner, filling every silence. After the demonstration ended, after the crowd had dispersed with nervous laughter and whispered speculation, Callus had retreated to her office on the 68th floor. The space was immaculate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Clearwater Heights. Minimalist furniture in shades of white and gray. A single abstract painting on the wall that had cost more than most people's cars. She sat at her desk, fingers steepled under her chin, staring at nothing. Dmitri and Alexei had followed her up, standing near the door like sentinels. "Who is he?" she asked without turning around. The twins exchanged a glance. "We don't know," Dmitri said, his accent thick and measured. "But he's trained, extensively." "Obviously," Callus said, her tone clipped. "I want to know where. I want to know his background, everything." Alexei shifted slightly. "We can ask HR for his file." "Do it," she said. And I want it on my desk in an hour." They left without another word. Callis leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. She replayed the scene in her mind, frame by frame. The way William had moved. The way he had redirected force instead of meeting it head-on. The way he had remained calm, almost detached, as if the entire situation was beneath him. It wasn't arrogance. It was something else. Something she couldn't name, and it bothered her. An hour later, Dmitri returned with a thin manila folder. He placed it on her desk without a word and left. Callis opened it. The file was sparse. Almost suspiciously so. Name, William Brown. Age, 38. Position, Retail Stock Associate, Apex Meridian Boutique. Hired, 8 months ago. Emergency contact, Sophie Brown, daughter. Age 10. Previous employment, listed as freelance consulting with no further details. Education, high school diploma. No certifications. No references beyond the standard background check. Callis frowned. This was a man who had just outmaneuvered 2 professional bodyguards. And his file read like someone who had spent the last decade doing nothing. She opened her laptop and typed his name into the company's internal database. Then into Google. Then into LinkedIn. Nothing. No social media presence. No professional profiles. No digital footprint beyond a generic address in the Brookside district. A working-class neighborhood on the west side of the city. She sat back, tapping her fingers on the armrest. People didn't just vanish from the internet. Not in this era. Not unless they were hiding something. Or hiding from something. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Reminder, leadership panel tonight at 7 p.m. at Grandstone Hall. Car leaves at 6:30. Callis sighed. She had forgotten. Another event, another stage, another performance of the polished, unshakable CEO who had all the answers. She closed the laptop and stood, walking to the window. Below, the city stretched out in all directions, a sprawling grid of ambition and anonymity. Somewhere down there, William Brown was probably back to stocking shelves. As if nothing had happened. But something had happened, and Callis couldn't let it go. That evening, after the panel, after the polite applause and the obligatory networking, Callis returned to her penthouse. She poured herself a glass of wine, something she rarely did, and sat on the leather couch in her living room. The space was silent. Too silent. She thought about her father, who had passed away 5 years earlier from a heart attack. He had worked in a factory for 30 years, never complained, never asked for anything. He had been proud of her success. She knew that, but he had also been distant. As if her world was too far removed from his to bridge. She thought about her mother, who still lived in the old neighborhood, who called once a week to ask if she was eating enough, sleeping enough, happy enough. Callis never knew how to answer that last question. She set the wine down, untouched, and pulled out her phone. She opened the company directory and found William's employee profile. There was a photo, a standard ID badge shot. He looked tired in it, but calm. His eyes were dark, steady, and somehow kind. She stared at the photo for a long time. Then she did something she rarely did. She made a decision, based not on strategy or logic, but on instinct. She would find out who William Brown really was. Not through files or databases or reports. She would ask him herself, and maybe, just maybe, she would understand why a man with that much skill, that much control, had chosen to spend his days restacking luxury goods in a boutique lobby. Because if there was one thing Callis Norwick understood, it was that people didn't hide unless they had something to protect, or something to run from. The days that followed the demonstration were strange for William Brown. Strange. Not because anything had fundamentally changed in his routine. He still woke at 5:30 a.m. Made breakfast for Sophie, walked her to the bus stop, and arrived at Apex Meridian by 8 a.m. But because people were looking at him differently now, employees, who had passed him 100 times without a glance, now nodded when they saw him. Security guards gave him knowing smiles. Even the boutique manager, a woman named Veronica, who had barely spoken to him beyond scheduling shifts, asked if he was settling in okay, with a tone that suggested she now saw him as something more than inventory help. William didn't like it. He had taken this job specifically because it was invisible. Stocking shelves, organizing backrooms, processing shipments. These were tasks that required no explanation, no history, no performance. He could show up, do the work, collect his paycheck, and go home to Sophie without anyone asking questions. But now, there were questions, and worse. There was a tension. On Thursday morning, 3 days after the incident, William was in the stockroom unloading a delivery of imported ceramics when the door opened behind him. He turned, expecting Veronica or one of the other retail associates. Instead, it was Kellis Norwick. She stood in the doorway, framed by the fluorescent light of the hallway, wearing a tailored cream blazer and dark jeans. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between curiosity and calculation. William straightened, setting down the box he was holding. "Ms. Norwick," he said evenly. "William," she replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. The stockroom was small, cramped with shelves and pallets, the air thick with the smell of cardboard and packing peanuts. It was not the kind of place someone like Kellis Norwick typically visited. She looked around briefly, as if taking inventory of the space, then turned her full attention to him. "I wanted to apologize," she said. William blinked. "For what?" "For putting you on the spot the other day. That wasn't fair." He studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "It's fine. No harm done." "Still," she continued, "I shouldn't have assumed you'd be comfortable with that kind of public attention." "I wasn't," William said simply. "But you didn't know that." Kellis nodded slowly. There was a pause, the kind that felt intentional, like she was weighing her next words carefully. "Where did you learn to move like that?" she asked. William's jaw tightened, just slightly. "Here and there. That's not an answer. It's the one I'm giving." Kellis tilted her head, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "You know, I looked into your file. It's remarkably empty." "That's intentional," William said. "I figured," she replied. "But it makes me curious. Curiosity isn't always helpful." "Maybe not," she said, taking a step closer. "But I can't help it. You made two of the best fighters I know look uncertain. That doesn't happen by accident." William didn't respond. He just stood there, hands at his sides, his expression neutral. Kellis continued, "I'm not here to pry into your personal life, William. I'm here because I'm genuinely interested in learning from you. I train regularly. I take self-defense seriously. And what you did the other day, that was something different. Something I haven't seen before." "It's not something I teach," William said quietly. "Why not?" "Because it's not what people think it is." Kellis frowned. "What do you mean?" William exhaled slowly, as if deciding whether to engage. Finally, he spoke. "People think fighting is about winning. About being stronger, faster, more aggressive. But that's not what I did the other day. I didn't win. I just didn't lose. There's a difference." Kellis considered this. "And you don't think that's worth teaching?" "I think it's worth living," William said. "But not selling." There was a weight to his words, a finality that made it clear he wasn't interested in continuing the conversation. Kellis studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," she said. "I respect that." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "But if you ever change your mind," she said, glancing back, "I'd like to learn. Not as a CEO, just as someone who wants to understand." William met her gaze. "I'll keep that in mind." She left without another word. William stood alone in the stockroom for a few minutes after she was gone, staring at the closed door. Then he returned to unpacking the ceramics, his movements slow and deliberate, as if trying to ground himself in the familiar rhythm of the work. But his mind was elsewhere. That evening, after his shift ended, William picked up Sophie from her after-school program at the Northridge Community Center. She was sitting on the steps outside, backpack at her feet, reading a library book with intense concentration. She looked up when she saw him and smiled, a gap-toothed grin that never failed to lift his spirits. "Hey, Dad," she said, hopping to her feet. "Hey, kiddo," he replied, ruffling her hair. They walked home together. A 20-minute trek through quiet residential streets, lined with old oaks and modest houses. Sophie talked the entire way, recounting her day with the kind of breathless enthusiasm that only a 10-year-old could muster. "And then Ms. Patterson said my essay was the best in the class, and she's going to put it on the bulletin board. And Mia said she wants to be partners with me for the science project." "And that's great, Soph," William said. Smiling, she paused, looking up at him. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah," he said. "Why?" "You seem quiet." William glanced down at her, surprised. She had always been perceptive, even as a toddler. "Just thinking," he said. "About what?" "Work stuff." Sophie frowned. "Did something bad happen?" "No," William said quickly. "Nothing bad. Just different." She seemed to accept this, nodding and returning her attention to the sidewalk. But William knew she would ask again later. She always did. When they got home, a small 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, William made dinner while Sophie did her homework at the kitchen table. Spaghetti with marinara sauce, garlic bread, and a side salad that Sophie would inevitably pick at, but not finish. As they ate, Sophie looked up at him. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why don't you ever talk about before?" William paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Before what?" "Before we moved here. Before this apartment. Before everything." He set the fork down carefully. "Because it's not important anymore." "But it is to me," Sophie said quietly. "I want to know about you. About who you were." William looked at his daughter, the small, brave person who had inherited his stubbornness and her mother's kindness. "I was someone who made mistakes," he said finally. "And I'm trying to be better now." Sophie nodded slowly, as if processing this. "Do you think you are?" she asked. "Better?" William smiled, just a little. "I'm trying." She smiled back, and they finished dinner in comfortable silence. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep, William sat on the small balcony outside his bedroom, looking out over the city lights in the distance. The air was cool, the sounds of traffic faint and distant. He thought about Callus Norwick, about the way she had looked at him in the stockroom. Not with judgment, but with something else. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. He thought about the life he had left behind. The one he had walked away from years ago, when everything fell apart. And he thought about the choice he made every single day to stay invisible. To stay small, to stay safe. Because the truth was, William Brown had once been someone very different, someone dangerous, someone who had learned the hard way. That strength without restraint was just another word for destruction. And he had promised himself, promised Sophie's memory of her mother, that he would never go back to that. Not for anyone, not even for a billionaire, with sharp eyes and sharper questions. 12 years ago, William Brown had a different name. Not legally, but professionally. In the underground circuit of Philadelphia. In the gyms that smelled of sweat and liniment. In the rings where money changed hands in crumpled bills and desperate whispers. He was known simply as the Conductor. Not because he was flashy or theatrical, but because of the way he moved. Fluid, precise, orchestrating every exchange like a maestro guiding a symphony. He never brawled. He never scrambled. He simply controlled the space, controlled the tempo. And when the moment was right, he finished. William had grown up in South Philadelphia, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still somehow made it to every school event, every parent-teacher conference, every moment that mattered. She had taught him kindness, patience, and the value of hard work. But the neighborhood had taught him something else: how to survive. He started training at 14 in a small boxing gym above a pizza shop. The coach, an old Cuban man named Esteban, had seen something in William that others missed. Not aggression, but awareness. The ability to read a situation 3 moves ahead, to anticipate, to adapt. You don't fight like you're angry, Esteban had told him once. You fight like you're solving a problem. William had taken that as a compliment. By 17, he was competing in amateur circuits. By 19, he had transitioned to mixed martial arts, blending boxing with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and wrestling. He was good. Better than good. He won his first 12 professional fights, most of them by decision, a few by submission. He never knocked anyone out. That wasn't his style. But then came the money, not from legitimate promotions or sponsorships, but from the underground. The places where fights weren't sanctioned, where medical staff was optional, where the stakes were higher and the consequences more severe. William told himself it was temporary. Just enough to pay off his mother's medical bills, just enough to get ahead. But temporary had a way of stretching into years. He met Rachel during that time. She was a nurse at the emergency room where he ended up after a particularly brutal fight. 3 cracked ribs and a concussion that should have kept him out for months. She had patched him up without judgment, just quiet competence and a raised eyebrow that said, "You know this is stupid, right?" He had fallen in love with her in that moment. They married a year later. Sophie was born 2 years after that. And William had promised Rachel, promised himself, that he would walk away from the fighting, that he would find legitimate work, build a stable life, be the kind of father his daughter deserved. But habits, especially dangerous ones, don't die easily. The night everything fell apart, William had agreed to one last fight. Just one. The payout was significant, enough to put a down payment on a house, enough to give Sophie a backyard and a good school district. The opponent was a newcomer to the circuit, a younger fighter with a reputation for recklessness. William figured it would be straightforward. Control the pace, tire him out, finish clean. But the kid came in wild, desperate, swinging with everything he had. And in the chaos, in the scramble, William had made a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. He had gone for a submission, a rear naked choke, a technique he had executed 1,000 times. But the kid didn't tap. He thrashed, panicked, and William, caught in the adrenaline and noise, held on a second too long. By the time the referee pulled him off, the kid was unconscious. He woke up 3 days later in a hospital with permanent brain damage. He would never fight again. Never walk without assistance. Never live independently. William had visited him once, standing outside the hospital room, watching through the window as the kid's mother sat beside the bed, holding her son's hand, crying silently. He never went back. The guilt didn't come all at once. It came in waves, in the middle of the night, in the quiet moments when Sophie laughed or Rachel kissed his forehead. It came in the realization that he had become the very thing he had promised himself he wouldn't. Someone who hurt people for money. Rachel had been devastated. Not angry, but heartbroken. She had begged him to walk away completely, to find another path, to choose their family over the violence. And he had tried. But the damage was done. The guilt, the shame, the weight of what he had done, it had driven a wedge between them. Rachel started working longer shifts, coming home later, speaking less. And William, drowning in self-loathing, had withdrawn further into himself. The divorce papers came on a Tuesday. Rachel had been kind about it, even then. She didn't want to punish him. She just couldn't live with the ghost of who he used to be. She just couldn't live with the ghost of who he used to be. They agreed on joint custody, but Sophie spent most of her time with Rachel. William saw his daughter on weekends, trying desperately to be present, to be the father she deserved, but always feeling like he was performing a role rather than living it. And then, 2 years ago, Rachel died, a car accident on a rainy evening. A drunk driver running a red light. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. Sophie had been 6 years old. William remembered the call. The way his legs had given out, the way the world had collapsed into a single, unbearable truth. He had wasted the time he had with her. He had let guilt and shame steal years he could never get back. At the funeral, Sophie had held his hand, her small fingers gripping tightly, and she had whispered, "Are you going to leave too, Daddy?" And William had made a second promise, one he swore he would never break. "No, Bug, I'm staying. I'm staying forever." He had moved them to Clearwater Heights 6 months later, far from Philadelphia, far from the gyms and the circuit and the ghosts. He took the first job he could find that didn't require explanation or credentials. Stockroom work at Apex Meridian. It was quiet. It was invisible. It was safe. Sophie adjusted better than he expected. She made friends at school, joined the art club, started bringing home drawings and stories that she proudly displayed on the refrigerator. And William, for the first time in years, felt like he could breathe. But the skills didn't disappear. The instincts didn't fade. He could still read a room, still anticipate movement, still control space with the same precision that had once made him dangerous. He just chose not to. Until Kellis Norwick had pointed at him in front of a crowd and said, "You, yes you." And for 30 seconds, William had allowed himself to be who he used to be. Not out of pride, not out of ego, but because walking away in that moment would have drawn more attention than participating. So he had moved, controlled, redirected. And then he had stepped back, returned to the shadows, and hoped that would be the end of it. But it wasn't, because Kellis had seen something in him. Something she recognized, perhaps in herself. The weight of a past that didn't fit neatly into the present. And now, sitting on his balcony in the cool night air, William knew that the carefully constructed invisibility he had built over the past 2 years was starting to crack. He thought about Sophie, asleep in her room, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm, her breathing soft and steady. He thought about the promise he had made at Rachel's grave, and he thought about the look in Kellis Norwick's eyes when she had said, "I'd like to learn." William closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He had spent years running from who he used to be, but maybe, just maybe, the only way forward was to finally make peace with it, not by returning to the violence, but by understanding that the skills he carried, the awareness, the control, they didn't have to be a curse. They could be something else. Something useful. Something good, if he could just figure out how. Kellis Norwick learned early that love was conditional. Not in the overt, cruel way that left scars you could see, but in the quieter, more insidious way that made you believe you had to earn it. That you were only as valuable as your last accomplishment, your last success, your last proof that you were worth the effort. Her parents, Dmitri and Annetta Norwick, had emigrated from Estonia when Kellis was 3 years old. They arrived in America with 2 suitcases, a few $100s, and a dream that their daughter would have opportunities they never did. Dmitri found work as a machinist in a factory on the outskirts of Clearwater Heights. Anita cleaned houses during the day and worked the night shift at a hotel downtown. They spoke broken English, saved every penny, and pushed Kellis with a relentless, exhausting intensity. "You want to be something?" her father would say, his accent thick, his eyes hard. "Then you work. No complaining. No excuses." Kellis didn't complain. She brought home straight A's. She won science fairs. She taught herself to code by age 12 using library computers and borrowed textbooks. She stayed up past midnight finishing projects, studying for exams, perfecting everything she touched. And her parents noticed. They praised her when she succeeded. But when she stumbled, when she brought home a B+ instead of an A, when she placed second instead of first, the warmth evaporated. Why not first? Her father would ask, not angry, just disappointed. You think second place gets you anywhere? Callis learned quickly that affection was a reward for performance. That love was something you achieved, not something you simply received. By high school, she was a machine, valedictorian, National Merit Scholar, captain of the debate team. She had no close friends, not because she was unkind, but because friendship required time and vulnerability, and she had neither to spare. Her parents were proud, finally. They displayed her awards in the living room, told their friends about her scholarships, her acceptance to Stanford. They had done it. Their daughter was going to be somebody, but Callis felt nothing, or rather, she felt empty. Like she had climbed a mountain only to realize the view from the top was just more mountains. At Stanford, she excelled. Double major in computer science and business. She founded her first startup in her dorm room, a logistics app that caught the attention of a venture capital firm by her sophomore year. She sold it for $3 million before she graduated. Her parents called ecstatic. You did it, Callis. You made it, but she hadn't. Not really. Because the money didn't fill the emptiness. The success didn't silence the voice in her head that said, "What's next? What more do you have to prove?" After graduation, she threw herself into building Norwick Digital Systems. She worked 18-hour days, slept in her office, skipped meals, ignored her health. She hired the best engineers, negotiated brutal contracts, outmaneuvered competitors twice her size, and she won. By 30, she was a billionaire. By 32, she was a household name, but she was also alone. Her father had died of a stroke when she was 28. He had been working a double shift at the factory, refused to slow down even after the chest pains started. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Callis had flown home for the funeral, stood beside her mother at the graveside, and felt nothing but a dull, distant ache. Not grief, exactly. Just the recognition that she would never hear him say he was proud of her again. That she had spent her entire life chasing his approval, and now he was gone. And she still didn't know if she had earned it. Her mother had hugged her at the funeral. Whispered, "He was so proud of you, Callis." So proud. But Callis didn't believe her. After her father's death, she doubled down on work. She launched 3 new products in 2 years, expanded into international markets, acquired 2 smaller competitors. She became ruthless in negotiations, uncompromising in her standards, untouchable in her reputation, and she trained. She had started kickboxing as a way to manage stress, but it quickly became something more. A way to exert control over her body, to prove that she was strong, that she could handle anything. She hired the Volkov twins after a stalking incident left her rattled. A former employee, fired for misconduct, had shown up at her office, agitated and unstable. Security had handled it, but the experience had shaken her more than she cared to admit. The twins were perfect. Professional, intimidating, loyal. They trained with her 3 times a week, pushed her harder than any coach ever had. And Callis thrived under the pressure. She learned to throw punches with precision, to grapple with technique, to endure pain without flinching. But beneath the discipline, beneath the control, was a fear she never acknowledged. The fear that if she stopped, if she slowed down, if she allowed herself to be anything other than perfect, she would disappear. That without the success, without the image, without the empire, she was nothing. That's why the demonstration with William had shaken her so deeply. Because in that moment, she had been bested. Not by someone trying to prove they were better, but by someone who didn't seem to care about proving anything at all. and that terrified her, because if strength didn't come from dominance, from control, from being the best, then where did it come from? That night, after leaving the stockroom, Callis had returned to her penthouse and done something she rarely allowed herself to do. She had cried, not loud, heaving sobs but quiet, exhausted tears that came from a place so deep she had forgotten it existed. She thought about her father, about the way he used to look at her report cards with that slight nod, that almost smile that meant she had done enough. For now, she thought about her mother, who still called every week, who asked if she was eating, if she was sleeping, if she was happy. Questions Callis never knew how to answer because she didn't know what happiness was supposed to feel like. She thought about the men she had dated, the ones who were intimidated by her success, the ones who wanted to fix her, the ones who left because they couldn't compete with her work. And she thought about William, standing in that stockroom, calm and steady, telling her that fighting wasn't what people thought it was. I didn't win. I just didn't lose. What did that even mean? Callis wiped her eyes, poured herself a glass of water, and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, glittering and indifferent. She had built an empire. She had achieved everything her parents had dreamed of and more, but she had no one to share it with. No one who saw her as anything other than the CEO, the billionaire, the untouchable icon. Billionaire, the untouchable icon. And for the first time in years, she wondered if that was enough. The next morning, Callis woke early, as always. She went through her routine, black coffee, news briefing, emails. But her mind kept drifting back to William, not romantically. Not yet. But with a curiosity that felt almost intrusive. Who was he really? What had he walked away from? And why did he seem so content with so little? She wanted to know. No, she needed to know. Because somewhere in the quiet way he moved, in the calm way he spoke, in the refusal to engage with ego or spectacle, was an answer to a question she had been asking her entire life. What does it mean to be strong? And maybe, just maybe, William Brown could teach her something. Her father never did. That strength wasn't about winning. It was about knowing when not to fight. It took Callis 3 days to find the truth. Not because the information was well hidden, but because it existed in places that required more than a simple internet search. It required knowing where to look, who to ask, and how to ask without raising alarms. She started with the basics. William Brown's employment history, sparse as it was, listed freelance consulting as his previous occupation. That was a red flag. Freelance consulting was code for, I don't want to explain what I actually did. So she went deeper. She contacted a private investigator, a discreet professional her company had used before for background checks on potential acquisitions. She gave him William's name, age, and last known address in Philadelphia. I need everything, she said. Employment, legal records, any aliases, any professional associations. Whatever you can find. The investigator called back 2 days later. Ms. Norwick, he said, his voice careful. I found something, but I'm not sure you're going to like it. Send it to me, she said. The file arrived in her inbox an hour later. Encrypted, password protected, marked confidential. Callis opened it in her office. Door locked, assistant dismissed for the afternoon. The first document was a series of fight records. Underground Circuit, Philadelphia, 2008 to 2015. 12 professional bouts. 11 wins. 1 no-contest. The name listed wasn't William Brown. It was William the conductor. Brennan. Callis stared at the screen. There were photos. Grainy, low-resolution images from illegal fight promotions. A younger William, leaner, harder, standing in a cage with his hands wrapped, his face calm even as blood dripped from a cut above his eyebrow. She scrolled further. There were records of hospitalizations. Opponents who had been injured. Nothing fatal but severe. Broken bones, concussions. One case of a dislocated shoulder that had required surgery. And then, at the bottom of the file, a news article. The headline read, "Underground fighter involved in incident resulting in permanent injury." Callis clicked it open. The article was brief, clinical. It described an unsanctioned match in which a 23-year-old fighter named Daniel Ortiz had been rendered unconscious during a submission attempt. Ortiz had suffered severe brain trauma and was left with permanent cognitive and physical disabilities. The opponent's name wasn't listed, but the investigator had included a note, confirmed via witness testimony. William Brennan, later changed name to William Brown. Callis sat back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. This was who William was, not a stockroom clerk, not a quiet, humble single father, a fighter. A dangerous one. Someone who had hurt people, seriously. Her first instinct was anger. How dare he hide this? How dare he walk into her building, into her world, pretending to be something he wasn't? But the anger faded quickly, replaced by something more complicated, because the article didn't paint William as a monster. It described him as cooperative with investigators, remorseful, and ultimately cleared of criminal charges due to the consensual nature of the match. It noted that he had visited the victim's family, offered financial assistance, and voluntarily withdrawn from all professional fighting. He hadn't run from what he did. He had faced it, and then he had disappeared. Callis closed the file and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the way William had moved during the demonstration. Controlled, precise, never aggressive. She thought about the way he had spoken in the stockroom. "I didn't win. I just didn't lose." And she thought about the way he had looked at her, not with fear or admiration, but with something sadder, recognition. He knew what it was like to carry weight, to live with guilt, to try to be someone different than who you used to be. Callis didn't know what to do with this information. Part of her wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation, to ask why he hadn't been honest. But another part of her, the part that had spent her entire life hiding her own wounds behind success and control, understood exactly why he had kept quiet, because some truths were too heavy to share with strangers. That evening, Callis attended a charity gala at the Belmore Hotel, one of those glittering events where the city's elite gathered to write checks and be photographed. She wore a black evening gown, her hair styled perfectly, her expression poised and polished. But her mind was elsewhere. She made small talk with donors, posed for photos with board members, and delivered a brief speech about the importance of investing in STEM education. The applause was polite, enthusiastic even, but it felt hollow. Halfway through the evening, she stepped outside onto the terrace for air. The city stretched out below, a sea of lights and shadows. The night was cool, the breeze carrying the faint scent of rain. She pulled out her phone and stared at William's employee profile photo. He looked tired in the picture, but also kind. Before she could second-guess herself, she typed out a message and sent it to his work email. "William, I need to speak with you. Not as your employer, just as someone who wants to understand. Tomorrow, 6 p.m., rooftop garden at Apex Meridian. Please come." She hit send before she could delete it. Then she returned to the gala, smiled through the rest of the evening, and went home alone. The next day, William saw the email during his lunch break. He stared at it for a long time, sitting in the employee break room with a sandwich he wasn't eating, trying to decide whether to respond. He knew what this was about. Or at least he could guess. Callis had found out. Somehow, she had dug into his past and uncovered the truth. And now she wanted answers. William's first instinct was to ignore the message, to let the silence speak for itself, to go back to being invisible. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the tone of the message. Not as your employer, just as someone who wants to understand. Or maybe it was the fact that he was tired of running, tired of hiding, Tired of pretending that the past didn't exist just because he refused to look at it, that he typed a one-word reply. Okay. That evening, William arrived at the rooftop garden at 5:55 p.m. The space was beautiful, meticulously landscaped with flowering plants, stone pathways, and benches overlooking the city. It was quiet, empty except for the two of them. Callis was already there, standing near the edge, her back to him. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked smaller somehow, less imposing. William walked over slowly, stopping a few feet away. "You found out," he said quietly. Callis turned to face him. Her expression was hard to read. Not angry, not sad. Just searching. "I did," she said. They stood in silence for a moment. "I'm not going to apologize for looking," Callis said finally. "I needed to know who you were." "I understand," William replied. "But I didn't bring you here to judge you," she continued. "I brought you here because I want to know why." "Why what?" "Why you walked away. Why you're here, stocking shelves, when you were clearly someone very different." William exhaled slowly. "Because I hurt someone, badly, and I needed to stop before I hurt someone else." Callis nodded. "The article said it was an accident." "It was," William said. "But that doesn't make it okay. Intent doesn't erase consequence." She studied him for a long moment. "You carry it with you," she said softly. "Every day, yes. And you think staying invisible makes up for it." William looked at her, surprised by the directness of the observation. "I think staying invisible keeps me from making the same mistake twice," he said. Callis crossed her arms, not defensively, but as if holding herself together. "I spent my whole life trying to be visible," she said quietly. "Trying to prove I was worth something. And I still don't know if I am." William frowned. "You built an empire." "I built a performance," she replied. "And I'm exhausted." They stood there, two people carrying different weights, recognizing something in each other they hadn't expected to find. Finally, Callis spoke again. "Teach me," she said. "Teach you what?" "How to stop fighting," she said. "How to be strong without needing to win." William looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly he nodded. "All right." The lessons began quietly, away from the public eye, 3 evenings a week, after the office had emptied and the cleaning crews had finished their rounds. William and Callis met in a small training room on the 42nd floor. It wasn't the gleaming corporate gym where she usually trained with the Volkov twins. It was smaller, more intimate, with padded floors and minimal equipment. William didn't teach her techniques at first. He taught her awareness. "Close your eyes," he said during their first session. Callis hesitated, then complied. "Now tell me what you heard in the last 30 seconds. She frowned. "I don't understand. Just try." She stood there, eyes closed, concentrating. The ventilation system. Someone walking in the hallway. A car horn outside. A car horn outside. "Good," William said. "Now tell me what you felt." "Felt?" "In your body. Your breath. Your weight distribution." Callis paused. "My shoulders are tense. My weight is forward, on the balls of my feet. Why?" "I don't know. Habit, I guess." "That's where it starts," William said gently. "You're always preparing to move forward, to engage, to push. But sometimes the strongest position is neutral, balanced, ready for anything, committed to nothing." Over the following weeks, he taught her how to breathe properly, how to center her weight, how to redirect force instead of meeting it head-on. They barely sparred. Instead, they moved slowly through drills, focusing on sensitivity and timing rather than power. Callis found it frustrating at first. She was used to intensity, to pushing herself to the limit. But gradually something shifted. She began to notice the tension she carried, the The way she held her jaw tight during meetings, the way her fists clenched when she felt challenged, and she began to let go. The Volkov twins noticed the change. During one of their regular training sessions, Dmitri remarked, "You're moving differently." "Different how?" Kellis asked. "Softer, but harder to catch." She smiled, but the piece couldn't last. It started with a video. Someone, an employee whose identity was never confirmed, had filmed one of the evening sessions through the training room window. The footage was shaky, shot from a distance, but it clearly showed William and Kellis working together, moving in slow, deliberate patterns. His hands guiding her shoulders, correcting her stance. Her face focused, vulnerable, open. The video was posted to a private company messaging board with a simple caption, "CEO getting private lessons from the stockroom guy. Interesting." Within hours, it had been screenshot and shared across multiple platforms. By the next morning, it was on social media. By noon, it had been picked up by a tech gossip blog. The headline read, "Billionaire CEO Kellis Norwick spotted in secret training sessions with mystery man." The article was breathless and speculative, hinting at everything from a secret romance to a publicity stunt. The comment section exploded with opinions, theories, and judgments. Kellis saw it during a board meeting. Her assistant had slipped her a tablet with the article pulled up. Her expression apologetic. Kellis read it, her face unreadable, then set the tablet down and continued the meeting as if nothing had happened. But inside, she was furious. Not at the article itself, but at the invasion. The assumption that anything she did in private was public property. After the meeting, she called William. "Have you seen it?" she asked. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I saw it. I'm sorry. This is my fault. I should have been more careful." "It's not your fault," William said. "People talk. That's what they do. But this affects you too. Your privacy, Sophie's." There was a pause. "I know," William said. "But I'm not ashamed of what we're doing." "Are you?" Kellis stopped. The question hung in the air. "No," she said finally. "I'm not." "Then let them talk." But the situation escalated. That evening, a journalist from a major business publication reached out to Kellis's PR team, requesting a statement about her relationship with William Brown. They had done their research. They knew about his past, about the underground fighting, about the incident with Daniel Ortiz. The email was polite, but pointed. "We're running a story on the personal life of Kellis Norwick and her connection to William Brown, a former underground fighter with a controversial history. We'd appreciate a comment before publication." Kellis stared at the email for a long time. Then she made a decision. She wouldn't hide. She wouldn't apologize. She wouldn't let anyone else control the narrative. She would tell the truth, herself. Kellis scheduled a press conference for the following morning. Her PR team panicked. "This is a mistake," her communications director said. "Let us handle it. Issue a brief statement, move on. Don't give this oxygen." But Kellis was firm. "No, I'm doing this myself." The conference was held in the main auditorium of Apex Meridian Tower. Media outlets filled the seats. Cameras lined the back wall, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Kellis walked onto the stage alone. No notes, no teleprompter. Just her, a microphone, and the truth. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "I'm here to address the recent speculation about my personal life and my relationship with William Brown." The room was silent. William is not a publicity stunt. He's not a scandal. He's a teacher, a father, and one of the most disciplined people I've ever met. Yes, he works in the stockroom at this building. And yes, he's been teaching me. Not martial arts for the sake of fighting, but awareness, control, and the kind of strength that doesn't require dominance. She paused, letting the words settle. "I know some of you have dug into his past. You've found out about his history as a fighter, about the mistakes he made. And I want to be clear, William has never hidden from those mistakes. He faced them, took responsibility, and chose to build a different life. That's not weakness. That's courage. Callis took a breath. I've spent my entire career trying to be perfect. Trying to prove that I was worth something. And in the process, I became someone I didn't recognize. Someone who valued winning over connection, control over compassion. Her voice cracked slightly, just for a moment. William didn't teach me how to fight. He taught me how to stop fighting. Against myself, against others, against the idea that I have to be flawless to be worthy. The room was completely still. So if you're looking for a scandal, you won't find one here. What you'll find is two people trying to be better than they were yesterday. And I'm not ashamed of that. She stepped back from the microphone. Thank you. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the entire room erupted in applause. Callis walked off the stage, her legs shaking, her heart pounding. Backstage, William was waiting. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, his expression soft, understanding. In Callis, for the first time in years, felt seen. That night, she returned to her penthouse, exhausted but lighter somehow. She poured herself a glass of water and sat on the couch, staring out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. I saw the conference. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Not for what you built. For who you're becoming. Callis read it 3 times, her eyes burning. She had spent her entire life waiting to hear her father say those words. And now, from her mother, they finally came. She set the phone down and allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness but from release. The next morning, William arrived at work to find a handwritten note on his locker. Thank you for yesterday. For everything. Meet me on the rooftop at noon. Callis. He smiled and tucked the note into his pocket. At noon, he took the elevator to the rooftop garden. Callis was there, sitting on one of the benches, 2 coffees on the table beside her. I didn't know how you'd take it, she said as he approached. So I got it black. Black's perfect, William said. Sitting down beside her, they sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the clouds drift across the sky. I've been thinking, Callis said finally, about what comes next. William glanced at her. And? I don't know, she admitted. For the first time in my life, I don't have a plan. And that terrifies me. That's good, William said. She looked at him surprised. How is that good? Because it means you're finally living instead of performing. Callis smiled, just a little. Is that what you've been doing? Living? William considered this. I've been surviving. But lately, with Sophie, with this, I think I'm starting to live again. Callis reached over and took his hand. Not romantically, not yet. Just a gesture of connection, of gratitude. Thank you, she said quietly. William squeezed her hand gently. Thank you. They sat there together, 2 people who had spent years running from their pasts, finally learning that the way forward wasn't through perfection or invisibility. It was through presence, through honesty, through allowing themselves to be seen. Weeks that followed the press conference brought unexpected changes to both their lives. For Callis, the public response was overwhelmingly positive. The vulnerability she had shown, the honesty about her struggles with perfectionism and the pressure to constantly perform, resonated with people in ways her business achievements never had. Her social media followers doubled. She received hundreds of messages from people sharing their own stories of burnout, of feeling like they had to prove their worth, of learning to choose authenticity over achievement. But more importantly, something shifted inside the company itself. Employees, who had previously kept their distance, now approached her differently. Not with fear or excessive deference, but with something closer to respect, mixed with relatability. They saw her as human now, flawed and trying, just like them. Callis announced a new company initiative, mindfulness and wellness programs for all staff. But unlike typical corporate wellness theater, this was different. She brought William in as a consultant, asking him to develop a program focused not on productivity or performance, but on genuine well-being. William was hesitant at first. "I'm not a corporate trainer," he told her. "I don't have certifications or credentials." "You have something better," Callis replied. "You have experience, and you know how to help people find balance." He agreed on one condition, that Sophie could be involved in some capacity. He wanted her to see him doing something meaningful, using his skills to help rather than harm. Callis didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." Callis didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." The first workshop was held on a Saturday morning in the community room on the ground floor of Apex Meridian. 20 employees had signed up, expecting perhaps some basic self-defense moves or stress management techniques. What they got was something entirely different. William stood at the front of the room, in jeans and a plain gray shirt. Sophie sitting in the front row with a notebook and colored pencils, quietly drawing. "This isn't about learning how to fight," William began. "It's about learning how to recognize when you're already fighting. Against yourself, against others, against circumstances you can't control, and how to choose a different response." He led them through breathing exercises, awareness drills, simple movements designed to help them notice where they held tension in their bodies. There were no punches thrown, no aggressive techniques demonstrated. Instead, he taught them how to ground themselves, how to pause before reacting, how to create space between stimulus and response. One participant, a marketing manager named Abigail, raised her hand halfway through. "This feels more like therapy than martial arts," she said, not unkindly. William smiled. "Maybe the best martial art is learning not to need it." The room was quiet for a moment. Then someone laughed, not mockingly, but with recognition. After the session, several participants stayed to talk with William, sharing their own struggles with anger, anxiety, the constant pressure to perform. He listened to each one, offering no quick fixes, just presence and understanding. Sophie watched it all with wide eyes. Afterward, as they walked to the car, she tugged on his hand. "Daddy, those people really liked what you said." "I hope it helped them," William replied. "It helps me too," Sophie said quietly. "When you're calm, when you're teaching, you seem happy." William stopped walking and knelt down to her level. "I am happy, Bug, happier than I've been in a long time." She hugged him tight, and he realized that for the first time since Rachel's death, he wasn't just surviving for Sophie's sake. He was actually living. Meanwhile, Callis was experiencing her own transformation. She had started attending William's workshops, not as the CEO observing the company program, but as a participant. She sat in the circle with her employees, practiced the breathing exercises, shared her own struggles when it felt appropriate, and she learned that leadership didn't require dominance. That strength could be quiet. That vulnerability wasn't weakness but connection. She also started making changes in how she ran the company. She reduced mandatory overtime, implemented proper boundaries around after-hours communication, and began actually listening when employees raised concerns about workload and stress. The board was skeptical at first, worried that these changes would impact productivity. But the opposite happened. Employee retention improved. Creativity increased. The company culture shifted from one of fear and competition to collaboration and mutual support. One evening, after a particularly meaningful workshop, Callis and William sat together in the now empty community room. "I've been thinking about something," Callis said. "What's that?" "About what you said once. That you didn't win, you just didn't lose." William nodded. "I think I finally understand what that means," she continued. "It means knowing when the real victory is in not engaging, in choosing peace over proving a point." "Exactly," William said. Callis looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Not for the future, not for achievement, but for now. For this moment. For the person sitting beside her who had somehow, quietly, changed everything. 6 months after the press conference, William and Kellis stood together in a place neither of them had expected to be, not in a boardroom or a training facility, but in a small community center in the Brookside district, the neighborhood where William and Sophie lived. They had just finished teaching a free self-defense and awareness workshop for single parents, many of whom worked multiple jobs and had never had the time or resources to invest in their own well-being. Sophie had helped set up chairs and hand out water bottles, greeting each participant with a smile that reminded William so much of Rachel. It sometimes hurt. As the last participants filed out, thanking them profusely, Kellis began folding chairs while William cleaned up scattered equipment. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I can handle it." "I know," Kellis replied, "but I want to." They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from truly knowing someone. Over the past months, their relationship had deepened in ways that surprised them both. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. There were no grand romantic gestures. Just quiet moments of understanding, shared meals with Sophie, late-night conversations about fear and hope and everything in between. Kellis had met Sophie officially a few weeks after the workshops began. She had been nervous, worried that Sophie might see her as an intruder or a threat to the life she and William had built together. But Sophie, perceptive as always, had simply looked at Kellis and said, "You're the lady my dad teaches, right?" "Yes," Kellis had replied. "He seems happier when he talks about teaching," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "So thank you." And just like that, Kellis had been accepted. Now, as they finished cleaning the community center, William turned to Kellis. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy?" Kellis paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Yes," she said finally. "Not in the way I thought I would be. Not because I achieved something or proved something, but because I finally feel like myself. Like I'm not performing anymore." William smiled. "That's good. What about you?" she asked. "I'm getting there," he said honestly. "For a long time, I thought the best I could do was hide from who I used to be. But now I think maybe I can use what I learned, the hard way, to help people. That feels like something." "It is something," Kellis said softly. They stood there in the empty room, the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and something unspoken passed between them. Kellis took a breath. "I have something to ask you," she said, her voice steady but her heart racing. William looked at her, curious. "I've been thinking about the future of the wellness program at Norwick Digital," she began. "And I don't want it to be just another corporate initiative that fades away. I want it to be real, sustainable, meaningful." "Okay," William said, listening. "I want you to lead it," Kellis continued. "Not as a consultant, but as a full partner. Co-director of a new division focused on holistic employee development. Real position, real salary, real impact." William blinked, surprised. "Kellis, wait, let me finish," she said, a slight smile on her face. "I'm not offering this because of what we are to each other. I'm offering it because you're the right person for it. Because what you've built in these past months, the way you've helped people, including me, that's rare. That matters." She took a step closer. "But I'm also asking for another reason," she said quietly. "I'm asking because I want you in my life. Not just as a teacher or a colleague, but as a partner. In all of this." William's eyes widened slightly. "I know this isn't a traditional proposal," Kellis said, her voice soft but certain. "And I know we've only been doing this for 6 months. But I also know that I've never felt more myself than when I'm with you. And I don't want to wait for the perfect moment or the perfect plan. I just want to build something real. Together." William stood there, processing, his heart full, "You're serious," he said, completely. He looked at her, this brilliant, fierce, vulnerable woman who had somehow seen past his defenses and chosen him anyway. "Yes," he said simply. Kellis's face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes and transformed her entire expression. "Yes to the job, or yes to all of it?" she asked. "All of it," William said, pulling her into a hug. They stood there, holding each other in the fading afternoon light. Two people who had spent years running from their pasts, finally choosing to walk forward together. Outside, Sophie waited on the steps, her notebook open, drawing a picture of three people holding hands. When William and Kellis emerged, she looked up and grinned. "Took you long enough," she said. William laughed, ruffling her hair. "Yeah, bud, I guess it did." And together, the three of them walked home, not to separate lives or separate worlds, but to something new, something honest, something worth choosing every single day. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.